Not toward the altar, away from it. Through morning fog, past shocked guests, straight into a future she couldn't see but knew she had to claim. Because Vivian Hale understood one terrible truth. Marriage to Edgar Ashcroft would kill everything she was, slowly, behind closed doors and polite smiles. This is the story of a woman who chose the unknown over the unthinkable, who traded Boston's gilded cage for Wyoming's brutal freedom, and who learned that survival sometimes means standing your ground when every instinct screams to run. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The dress hung in Vivian's bedroom like a ghost, all ivory silk and French lace, its train pooling across the Persian rug in waves that caught the pre-dawn light. Her mother had cried when it arrived from the dressmaker. "You'll be the most beautiful bride Boston has ever seen," she'd whispered, touching the delicate beadwork as though it were made of prayer. Vivian stared at it now and felt nothing but cold. She stood at her window in her cotton nightgown, watching the city sleep. Gas lamps flickered along Beacon Street. The Charles River beyond was a dark ribbon, barely visible through the October mist. In 6 hours, 300 guests would fill the first church. In 7, she would become Mrs. Edgar Ashcroft. In 8, her life as Vivian Hale would be legally, permanently over. Her hands shook as she pulled the dress from its hanger. The corset came first, the same one she'd worn for the final fitting 3 days ago. Her fingers fumbled with the laces. She'd always had help with this. Her lady's maid, Marie, whose steady hands and soft humming had been part of Vivian's mornings for 10 years. But Marie was asleep in the servants' quarters, and Vivian couldn't risk waking anyone. Not for this. She cinched the corset tight enough to breathe, loose enough to move. The petticoats followed, then the gown itself. The fabric was heavier than she remembered, the bodice stiff with boning and embroidery. She fastened what she could reach, left the rest undone. In the mirror, she looked half-finished. A bride interrupted. That was accurate enough. The wedding veil sat on her dressing table in its velvet box, a cascade of silk tulle that had belonged to her grandmother. Vivian picked it up, held it to the window light, then set it down again. She wouldn't need it where she was going. Instead, she opened her wardrobe and pulled out the plainest dress she owned, a brown traveling suit she'd bought last year for a trip to her aunt's house in Providence. Simple wool, high collar, no ornamentation, the kind of dress a working woman might wear, the kind of dress that wouldn't draw attention on a train platform. She changed quickly, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. The wedding gown crumpled to the floor in a pile of silk and broken dreams. She stepped over it without looking back. From beneath her bed, she pulled the leather satchel she'd packed 3 nights ago, working in darkness while the house slept. 2 spare dresses, undergarments, a wool coat, her mother's silver hairbrush, the only thing she was stealing, and money. $240 in bills and coins, every cent she'd saved from birthday gifts and holiday allowances over the years, plus the emergency fund her grandmother had left her in a trust her father didn't control. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She paused at her door, listening. The house was silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock downstairs and the creak of old wood settling. Her father was asleep in the master bedroom at the end of the hall, her mother beside him. Her younger brother Thomas in his room near the stairs. They would wake in a few hours expecting a wedding. They would find an empty room and a note she'd written and rewritten a dozen times, each version worse than the last. The final draft sat on her pillow now, held down by the velvet box with the veil inside. "I'm sorry, I can't do this. Please don't try to find me." V. Pathetic. Cowardly. True. Vivian picked up her satchel and opened her door. The hallway was dark, the gaslights turned low for the night. She moved carefully, avoiding the boards she knew would creak. Third one from her door, the one near the bathroom, the landing at the top of the stairs. She'd walked this path 100 times as a child, sneaking down to the kitchen for cake or out to the garden to watch the stars. She'd never walked it like this. The stairs seemed endless. Each step felt like a small betrayal, a door closing behind her. She thought of her mother's face when she'd see the note, her father's rage, Thomas's confusion. He was only 14, too young to understand why his sister would run from a man everyone called a good match and an excellent catch. But Thomas had never sat across a dinner table from Edgar Ashcroft and seen the way his smile never reached his eyes. Had never felt Edgar's hand on his arm, gripping just a little too hard when he thought no one was watching. Had never heard the subtle threats wrapped in compliments. You're so spirited, Vivian. We'll have to work on that after the wedding. A man's wife should reflect his values, don't you think? Thomas had never been owned. He wouldn't understand. Vivian reached the front door. Her hand rested on the brass knob, and for one terrible moment she couldn't move. This was insane. She was 23 years old, a woman of good family and fine education, and she was about to walk out of her father's house like a thief in the night. Where would she go? How would she live? What did she know about survival outside these walls? Outside the careful architecture of Boston society? Nothing. She knew nothing. But she knew what waited if she stayed. She turned the knob and stepped into the October darkness. The streets of Beacon Hill were empty at this hour, the cobblestones slick with mist. Vivian walked quickly, her satchel heavy against her hip, her breath coming in small clouds. She'd planned this route carefully, down Mount Vernon Street, across Charles, then south toward the station. The earliest westbound train left at 6:15. She had 90 minutes. Her boots clicked against the stones, too loud in the silence. Every window she passed felt like an eye. Every shadow seemed to hide someone who would recognize her, call out, drag her back home. But the city slept on, indifferent to one woman's escape. She thought about the last time she'd seen Edgar, 2 nights ago, at the rehearsal dinner. He'd stood at the head of the table in his expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly oiled, his hand possessively on the back of her chair as he made a toast. "To my beautiful bride," he'd said, raising his glass, "who will soon learn what it means to be cherished and protected. A woman of her quality deserves nothing less than complete devotion." The guests had applauded. Her mother had wiped away tears. Vivian had smiled until her face hurt and felt the walls closing in. Later, when the guests had gone, Edgar had walked her to the parlor, closed the door, and kissed her. It was their 4th kiss. Her father had insisted they maintain propriety until after the wedding, and it felt like all the others, possessive, demanding, utterly disconnected from anything she wanted. His hands had moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and she'd frozen. "You're nervous," he'd said, his breath hot against her ear. "That's natural. But after Saturday, you'll have nothing to fear. You'll be mine, completely. I'll take care of everything." That was the word that haunted her. Everything. Her money, her choices, her body, her life. Everything that made her Vivian would become his to manage, his to control, his to reshape into whatever image of a wife he preferred. The law would back him. Society would applaud him, and she would disappear into the role like a woman drowning in silk, unless she ran. Boston's South Station rose before her like a cathedral of iron and glass, its arched windows beginning to glow with the first hints of dawn. Vivian pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the great hall, where the air smelled of coal smoke and coffee, and the particular electricity of places where people came to leave. The ticket counter was open, manned by a thin clerk with spectacles and a mustache that drooped past his chin. He looked up as Vivian approached, his expression shifting from bored to curious. "Help you, miss?" Vivian had rehearsed this. Keep it simple. Don't volunteer information. "1 ticket west, please. As far as this will take me." She slid a $20 bill across the counter. The clerk picked up the bill, examined it, then looked at her more carefully. She knew what he saw. A young woman alone at dawn. No luggage but a single satchel. No companion, no wedding ring. A woman running from something. "West is a big direction," he said slowly. "You got a destination in mind?" "Anywhere past the Mississippi." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Whatever leaves soonest." The clerk studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. It wasn't his business. He pulled out a schedule, ran his finger down the columns. 6:15 to Chicago, he said. Connects to the Union Pacific. That'll get you to Cheyenne by Thursday if the weather holds. $15.50. Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. Vivian knew almost nothing about it except what she'd read in dime novels. Wild country, cowboys, Indians, gold rushes that had come and gone. A place where Boston's rules meant nothing. "I'll take it." The clerk counted out her change, stamped her ticket, and slid both across the counter. "Platform 3. Train boards in 40 minutes. You traveling alone?" "Yes. Might want to stick to the women's car once you hit Chicago. Gets rough west of there." He said it casually, but his eyes held a warning. "You running from something, miss?" Vivian picked up her ticket and change. "I'm running towards something." It wasn't quite a lie. The platform was nearly empty. A few businessmen reading newspapers, an older woman with 3 children clinging to her skirts, a porter loading trunks onto a baggage cart. Vivian found a bench near the track and sat, her satchel on her lap, her heart hammering. 40 minutes until the train left. 40 minutes for something to go wrong. She imagined her father waking early, checking her room, finding the note. Imagined him sending servants to the station, police to stop her. Imagined Edgar himself showing up, his charming mask finally dropping to reveal the rage beneath. But the minutes ticked past and nothing happened. The platform filled slowly with travelers. The conductor appeared, checking his pocket watch. Steam hissed from the locomotive at the head of the train, a black iron beast that would carry her away from everything she'd ever known. "All aboard! Boston to Chicago! All aboard!" Vivian stood on legs that felt like water. She found a seat in the second car, a window seat facing forward. The compartment smelled of old leather and stranger's perfume. Across from her sat a middle-aged woman in a gray dress, knitting something shapeless. She glanced at Vivian, nodded politely, then returned to her needles. The train lurched, pulled forward, began to roll. Through the window, Vivian watched Boston slide past. The station, the commercial blocks, the neighborhood she'd known her entire life. The city where she'd been born, educated, prepared for a future that would have ground her down to nothing. She pressed her hand against the glass and felt the vibration of the wheels beneath her, the forward momentum that couldn't be stopped now. There was no going back. Even if she wanted to, even if fear overcame her, the train was moving and Boston was shrinking behind her, and every second carried her farther from the life she'd refused. For the first time since she'd opened her eyes that morning, Vivian let herself breathe. The woman across from her looked up from her knitting. "First time on a train?" "No." Vivian's voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. "First time alone." Running from something or toward something? It was the second time someone had asked. Vivian looked at the woman, her weathered face, her competent hands, her eyes that had clearly seen enough of the world to recognize a runaway when one sat across from her. "Both," Vivian said finally. The woman smiled. "Honest answer. I like that." She held out her hand. "Martha Green, heading home to Springfield." Vivian shook it. "Vivian—" She stopped. Giving her real name felt dangerous, but lying felt worse. "Vivian Hale." "Pleased to meet you, Vivian Hale." Martha's grip was firm and warm. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Want some advice from someone who's been there?" "I'm not sure I deserve advice." "Nobody deserves it. That's why it's free." Martha set down her knitting. "Whatever you're running from, it'll chase you in your head long after you've left it behind. The trick isn't running fast enough. It's deciding what you're worth when you stop." Vivian stared at her. "I don't understand." "You will." Martha picked up her needles again. "Give it time." The train carried her west through Massachusetts, into New York, across landscapes that grew less familiar with every mile. Vivian watched forests give way to farmland, small towns blur past, rivers wind beneath iron bridges. The other passengers came and went at each stop, some staying for hours, some for only minutes. But Martha remained, her knitting needles clicking steadily, her presence oddly comforting. They didn't talk much. Martha seemed to understand that Vivian needed silence more than conversation, space to sit with what she'd done. But occasionally, she'd offer small observations. "That's the Hudson," or "Storm coming in from the west," or "You'll want to eat something before we hit Chicago. Gets harder to find decent food past there." Vivian tried to eat. The conductor came through selling sandwiches and coffee from a cart, and she bought both, but they sat heavy in her stomach. Everything felt unreal. The rocking motion of the train, the strangers around her, the fact that she was hurtling toward a future she couldn't imagine. By nightfall, when the train finally pulled into Chicago's Union Station, Vivian's entire body ached from sitting. She gathered her satchel, said goodbye to Martha, and stepped onto a platform that seemed to stretch for miles in both directions. Chicago was enormous, loud, nothing like Boston's careful order. People rushed in every direction, shouting in languages Vivian didn't recognize. The air smelled of stockyards and factory smoke. Electric lights blazed from buildings that seemed to scrape the sky itself. She found her connecting train, the Union Pacific, heading west to Cheyenne, and bought a ticket with trembling hands. This train didn't leave until morning. She'd have to spend the night in the station. The women's waiting room was crowded but safer than the benches outside. Vivian found a corner, set her satchel on her lap, and tried to sleep sitting up. Around her, other women did the same, immigrants with babies, farm wives traveling alone, a young woman who looked even more terrified than Vivian felt. No one spoke. They were all just surviving the night. The Union Pacific left at dawn, and Vivian barely remembered boarding. Exhaustion had hollowed her out, left her moving through the motions like a ghost. She found a seat in the women's car, a long compartment with wooden benches and windows that didn't quite close, and pressed her face against the glass as Chicago disappeared behind them. The landscape changed. Cities gave way to prairie, endless grass rippling under wind, sky so big it hurt to look at. Vivian had never seen country like this, so open, so empty, so utterly indifferent to human presence. It made Boston feel like a toy city, something a child might build and abandon. The other passengers were different here too. Fewer fancy dresses, more worn wool and practical cotton. Women with calloused hands and sunburned faces. A farmer's wife who smelled of lye soap. A young mother nursing a baby while two older children fought over a wooden horse. No one asked Vivian who she was or where she was going. Out here, it seemed, those questions mattered less. She counted the days as they rolled past. 3 days to Omaha, 4 to North Platte, 5 to Cheyenne. At each stop, the train emptied a little more, passengers dispersing into towns that looked like they'd been dropped onto the prairie and left to figure things out. Vivian's money dwindled. Food was expensive on the train, and she had to make it last. She ate crackers and hard cheese, drank water from the tanks at station stops, and tried not to think about the warm meals she'd taken for granted her entire life. By the time the train pulled into Cheyenne on a Thursday afternoon, Vivian had been traveling for 8 days. She'd lost weight. Her traveling suit was wrinkled and dirty. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd run as far as her money could take her and was now standing on a train platform in Wyoming territory with no plan and nowhere to go. The station agent looked her over when she approached his window. "Help you? I need to get to Red Hollow." She'd heard 2 cowboys talking about it on the train. A small settlement north of Cheyenne, remote, the kind of place where questions weren't asked. It seemed as good a destination as any. "Red Hollow?" The agent frowned. "That's 60 miles north. Stagecoach runs twice a week. Next one's Saturday. 2 days." Vivian had $7 left. "Is there somewhere I can stay until then?" The agent jerked his thumb toward the street. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, 2 blocks east. Tell her Frank sent you. She'll give you a fair rate." But Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a narrow 2-story building that leaned slightly to the left, its paint peeling, its front steps sagging. But it was clean inside, and Mrs. Patterson herself, a stern woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, looked Vivian up and down and named a price that wouldn't completely destroy her remaining funds. 2 nights, meals included, $1.50, Mrs. Patterson said. Payment up front. No men in the rooms. No drinking. No noise after 9. Vivian counted out the money. "Do you need my name?" "Need it for the register." Mrs. Patterson opened a ledger, dipped a pen in ink. "Name?" Vivian hesitated. Then, "Vivian Hale." If she was starting a new life, she might as well start it honestly. Mrs. Patterson wrote it down without comment, then handed Vivian a key. "3rd floor, end of the hall. Supper's at 6. You're late? You go hungry?" The room was small, a bed, a washstand, a chair by the window, but it was hers. Vivian dropped her satchel on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally, for the first time since leaving Boston, let herself cry. Not from regret, not from fear, from exhaustion and relief and the overwhelming strangeness of being here, in this place, with no one to tell her what to do next. She cried until her throat ached, then washed her face in the basin and went downstairs for supper. The dining room was full of boarders, railroad workers, a shopkeeper, 2 women who might have been school teachers. They ate in near silence, passing dishes of boiled potatoes and tough beef, soaking up gravy with bread. Vivian sat at the end of the table and tried to eat slowly, make the food last. She didn't know when she'd eat this well again. Across from her, one of the women looked up. She was younger than Vivian had first thought, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and a scar along her jaw. "You just get in?" Vivian nodded. "Where from?" "Boston." The woman's eyebrows rose. Long way. You got people here? No? Work? Not yet. The woman studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Good luck with that. Jobs are scarce unless you're willing to work in the saloons, and even then, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Another woman, older, with a kind face, leaned forward. Don't scare the girl, Ruth. There's decent work if you know where to look. She smiled at Vivian. What can you do? Vivian's mind went blank. What could she do? Embroider, play piano, recite poetry in French? None of that mattered here. I can read and write, she said finally. I'm good with numbers. I learn quickly. Shopkeeper might need help, the older woman said. Old Mr. Chen's been looking for someone to manage his books. You could ask. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you, Vivian said. I will. Saturday morning came too soon and not soon enough. Vivian woke before dawn, packed her satchel, and left Mrs. Patterson's boarding house with $3.20 to her name. The stagecoach left at 7 from the depot at the edge of town. When she arrived, a small crowd had already gathered, miners heading north, a family with a wagon full of furniture, a cowboy with a broken arm in a sling. The stage itself was a battered Concorde coach pulled by 6 horses, its driver a weathered man who looked like he'd been carved from the same wood as his seat. Red Hollow, he called. Last call for Red Hollow. Vivian climbed aboard. The interior was cramped and smelled of old tobacco. She wedged herself between the family's luggage and a miner who fell asleep immediately, his head lolling against the window. The stage lurched forward, and Cheyenne began to recede. The road north was barely a road, more like a suggestion carved through prairie and scrub. The stage bounced over ruts, swayed around rocks, forded shallow creeks that soaked the floor. Vivian's teeth rattled. Her spine ached. The miner's head kept dropping onto her shoulder. But through the window, the country unfolded in ways that made her forget the discomfort. Rolling grassland dotted with cattle. Distant mountains, their peaks still white with early snow. Sky that went on forever, blue and clean and so big it made her feel impossibly small. This was the world Edgar Ashcroft would never see. The world her father couldn't imagine. The world she'd chosen, for better or worse. Around mid-afternoon, the driver called down, Red Hollow, 20 minutes. Vivian sat up straighter, tried to see ahead. Nothing yet but more prairie, more grass. Then gradually, shapes appeared on the horizon. Buildings, maybe a dozen of them, clustered along what might have been a main street. No church steeple. No grand homes, just rough structures that looked like they'd been hammered together from scrap lumber and determination. Red Hollow. The stage rolled to a stop in front of a building with a hand-painted sign, General Store. The driver hopped down, opened the door. End of the line, folks. Watch your step. Vivian climbed out on shaking legs. The family retrieved their wagon. The miners headed toward what looked like a saloon. The cowboy tipped his hat and limped away. She stood alone in the street, her satchel in her hand, and looked at the town that would either kill her or save her. A man emerged from the general store. Chinese, elderly, wearing an apron. He looked at Vivian with sharp eyes. You lost? He asked. No, Vivian said. I'm looking for work. The man's expression didn't change. What kind? Any kind. He studied her for a long moment, this Boston girl in her dirty traveling suit, with her East Coast accent and her ridiculous hope. Then he smiled, just slightly. You any good with numbers? Yes. Can you lift a 50-pound sack of flour? Vivian had no idea. I can try. The man laughed, a sound like dry leaves. Come inside. We'll see. And just like that, Vivian Hale's new life began. The interior of Chen's General Store smelled like coffee beans and wood soap, and something else Vivian couldn't identify. Maybe leather, maybe tobacco, maybe just the accumulated scent of 100 different goods crammed into a space barely big enough to hold them. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, stocked with everything from canned peaches to horseshoe nails. A wood stove squatted in the corner, its pipe disappearing through the ceiling. The floor was uneven planks that creaked with every step. Mr. Chen led her past barrels of flour and sugar, around a display of tin cookware, to a small desk buried under ledgers and receipts. He gestured at the chaos. My daughter used to keep the books. She married a rancher, moved south. Now it's just me, and I'm too old for this mess. He fixed Vivian with a look that was equal parts challenge and assessment. You think you can make sense of it? Vivian set down her satchel and picked up the top ledger. The handwriting was neat, but the entries were jumbled. Sales mixed with inventory. Debts listed without dates. Calculations that didn't add up. It was a disaster, but it was a familiar kind of disaster. Her father had made her learn bookkeeping when she was 16. A woman of your station should understand household accounts, he'd said. She'd hated it then. Now it might save her life. I can fix this, she said. Good. You start Monday. Room and board plus $3 a week. You sleep upstairs, eat with me and my wife. You steal from me, I throw you out. You slack off, same thing. We clear? $3 a week. It was nothing compared to the allowance she'd had in Boston, but it was hers, earned, real. We're clear. Mr. Chen nodded once. My wife's name is Lynn. She doesn't speak much English, but she'll show you your room. Don't expect fancy. This isn't Boston. Vivian's head snapped up. How did you... Your accent, your hands, the way you hold yourself. Mr. Chen's expression was unreadable. You're running from something. That's your business. Just don't bring your trouble to my door. I won't. See that you don't. He turned toward the back of the store and called out something in Chinese. A moment later, a small woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Chen spoke to her in rapid sentences Vivian couldn't follow, then gestured at Vivian. This is Miss Hale. She'll be working here. Show her the room. Lin Chen looked Vivian up and down with the same sharp assessment as her husband, then nodded and beckoned. Vivian grabbed her satchel and followed. The stairs at the back of the store were narrow and steep, more like a ladder than proper steps. Vivian climbed carefully, her satchel bumping against her legs. At the top was a short hallway with 3 doors. Lin opened the middle one. The room was tiny, barely 8 feet square, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over Red Hollow's main street. The walls were bare wood. The floor was bare wood. There was no rug, no curtain, no decoration of any kind. It was perfect. Lin said something in Chinese, set a folded blanket on the bed, then left. Vivian heard her footsteps retreat down the hall, then the creak of another door closing. She was alone. Vivian set her satchel on the bed and went to the window. From here, she could see most of Red Hollow, the saloon across the street, a blacksmith shop, what might have been a boarding house, a livery stable at the far end. Beyond that, nothing but prairie stretching to the mountains. No crowds, no carriages, no Edgar Ashcroft. She pressed her forehead against the glass and felt something unknot in her chest. She'd made it. Against all odds, against all sense, she'd run from Boston and landed here, in this impossible place, with a job and a room and a chance to become someone new. The fear was still there, the uncertainty, the bone-deep exhaustion. But underneath it all was something else, something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She unpacked her satchel slowly, putting her few belongings in the washstand drawer. 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, the money she had left, $3.20, which she tucked under the mattress. Everything she owned in the world fit in a space the size of a hat box. When she was done, she lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was lumpy and smelled faintly of mothballs, but it was hers. She didn't have to share it with a husband she despised. Didn't have to wake up to Edgar's hands on her, his voice telling her what to think and how to behave and what version of herself she was allowed to be. For the first time in 6 months, Vivian fell asleep without fear. She woke to the sound of hammering. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in Boston, that the house was being repaired, that none of this had happened. Then she opened her eyes and saw the bare wood walls and remembered. Wyoming. Red Hollow. Freedom. She sat up, disoriented. The light coming through the window was wrong, too bright, too angled. She'd slept through the afternoon and into evening. Her stomach growled. When was the last time she'd eaten? Breakfast in Cheyenne, stale bread, and weak coffee. She stood, straightened her dress, and went downstairs. The store was closed, the front door locked, but she could hear voices from the back. She followed them to a small kitchen where Mr. and Mrs. Chen sat at a table eating rice and vegetables from chipped bowls. They looked up when she entered. You hungry? Mr. Chen asked. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long. You look dead on your feet. Sit. He gestured to an empty chair. Lynn stood and filled a bowl from a pot on the stove, then set it in front of Vivian with chopsticks. Vivian stared at the chopsticks. She'd never used them before. In Boston, there had been a Chinese restaurant her father had taken her to once, but they'd provided forks for the white customers. Lynn watched her, then picked up her own chopsticks and demonstrated, hold them like this, move them like this. Vivian tried to copy her and failed spectacularly. Rice scattered across the table. Mr. Chen made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Use your hands if you have to," he said. "We're not formal here." Vivian's face burned, but she was too hungry to care about pride. She picked up the bowl and ate with the chopsticks as best she could, which meant mostly using them as tiny shovels. The food was simple: rice, stir-fried cabbage, some kind of preserved vegetable she didn't recognize. But it was warm and filling and tasted better than anything she'd eaten on the train. "Thank you," she said when she finished. Lynn nodded and cleared the bowls. Mr. Chen leaned back in his chair, studying Vivian with those sharp eyes. "You really run all the way from Boston by yourself?" Vivian hesitated. How much should she tell him? But lying seemed pointless now. "Yes." "Family looking for you?" "Probably." "Law looking for you?" "No, I didn't break any laws." "Just broke some hearts, maybe." Mr. Chen's expression was unreadable. "That's the usual reason a woman runs. Bad marriage or a bad marriage coming. The second one." He was quiet for a moment. "You plan to stay here, or are you just passing through?" "I don't know yet." It was the honest answer. "I need to work. Need to save money. After that?" She shrugged. "Fair enough. Just know that Red Hollow isn't Boston. People here don't care much about where you came from or who your family was. But they'll notice if you pull your weight or if you don't. They'll notice if you're honest or if you lie, and they've got long memories for both." "I understand." "Good." Mr. Chen stood. "You start at dawn Monday. Store opens at 7. Before that, there's sweeping to do, inventory to check, deliveries to sort. You'll learn as you go." Dawn. Vivian had never woken at dawn in her life unless there was a reason, a trip, a party, a wedding she was running from. But she nodded. "I'll be ready." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Vivian listened to the sounds of Red Hollow settling into darkness. Somewhere a dog barked. Piano music drifted from the saloon, punctuated by laughter and the occasional shout. The wind rattled her window in its frame. It was nothing like Boston's sounds. No carriages on cobblestones, no distant foghorns, no city hum. This was emptier, rawer, harder. She wondered if her family had stopped looking for her yet, if her father had given up, written her off as lost, if her mother cried at night, if Thomas missed his sister. She wondered if Edgar had been angry or relieved. Maybe both. Then she stopped wondering and went to sleep. Monday morning arrived cold and dark. Vivian, dressed by candlelight, splashed her face with water from the basin and made her way downstairs. Mr. Chen was already in the store, lighting lamps, checking the stove. He handed her a broom without comment. "Start with the floor, then the front step, then come find me." Sweeping was harder than it looked. The floor was uneven, the dirt stubborn. Vivian's arms ached after 10 minutes. After 20, she had blisters forming on her palms. But she kept going, working her way from the back of the store to the front, pushing dust and debris into piles, sweeping them out the door. The front step was worse. Red Hollow's street was mostly dirt, and the wind blew it everywhere. She swept the step, and 5 minutes later it was dirty again. She swept it again. Same result. "You're fighting the wind," Mr. Chen said from the doorway. "Can't win that fight. Just make it presentable and move on." Vivian nodded, too out of breath to speak. The rest of the morning was a blur of tasks she'd never done before. Hauling crates from the back room, stocking shelves, learning where everything went and why. Flour and sugar near the front, hardware and tools in the back, fabric and notions in the middle. Each item had its place, its price, its purpose. Customers trickled in as the day wore on. A rancher buying nails and rope, a woman purchasing thread and buttons, a boy with a penny buying hard candy from a jar on the counter. Mr. Chen handled most of the transactions, but he made Vivian watch, made her learn. "You see how I weigh the flour? Always a little generous. Customer remembers that. You see how I mark the debt in the ledger? Name, amount, date, no exceptions. People forget what they owe if you don't write it down. By midday, Vivian was exhausted. Her feet hurt, her back hurt, her hands were raw. She'd never worked like this, never stood for hours, never lifted heavy things, never felt her body complain in so many ways at once. But she'd also never felt more awake. At noon, Lynn brought down rice and tea. They ate quickly, standing up, because there were more customers coming. Vivian was learning their faces. The rancher with the scar on his cheek, the woman with the twin boys, the old prospector who smelled like whiskey and bought tobacco every other day. None of them asked who she was or where she'd come from. Out here, it seemed, those questions really didn't matter. The afternoon brought a different kind of customer, a group of cowboys riding in hard, their horses lathered, their faces grim. They tied up outside the saloon, but two of them crossed to the general store. "Chen," one of them said. He was young, maybe 25, with fair hair and a jaw like a hatchet. "We need supplies, flour, coffee, dried beef. Whatever you got." "How much?" "Enough for 10 men, 2 weeks." Mr. Chen started pulling items from the shelves. The cowboy watched, then his eyes landed on Vivian. She felt his gaze like a physical thing, assessing, calculating. "Who's this?" "My new assistant," Mr. Chen said without looking up. "Miss Hale." "Miss Hale?" The cowboy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're new to Red Hollow." "I am." "Where from?" Vivian met his stare. "East." "East is a big place." "It is." The cowboy studied her a moment longer, then turned back to Mr. Chen. "Put it on Thorne's account." Mr. Chen's hands paused. "Thorne's account is already running high." "Then it'll run higher. He's good for it." "That's what he said last month." The cowboy's smile vanished. "You calling him a liar?" "I'm saying I'd like to see some payment before I extend more credit." The second cowboy stepped forward. He was older, harder looking, with a revolver on his hip. "You got a problem with Caleb Thorne, Chen?" "No problem, just business." "Then do business and shut up about payment." The tension in the room shifted, tightened. Vivian's pulse kicked up. She'd seen arguments before, heated debates at dinner parties, her father's cold anger when things didn't go his way. But this felt different, dangerous. Mr. Chen held the older cowboy's gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine. I'll add it to the account." He started wrapping the supplies in brown paper, his movements precise. The younger cowboy, the one who'd asked about her, leaned against the counter. "You settling in Red Hollow, Miss Hale?" "I'm working here." "Working." He said it like it was a foreign concept. "Pretty girl like you seems ashamed to waste yourself sweeping floors." "I don't consider it a waste." "No?" He grinned. "Give it a month. You'll be bored out of your mind. Not much happens in Red Hollow unless you're looking for trouble." "I'm not." "Shame." He took the wrapped supplies from Mr. Chen, tipped his hat. "See you around, Miss Hale." They left. Vivian watched through the window as they loaded their horses and rode off toward the north. Her hands were shaking. "Who was that?" she asked. "Hands from the Thorne Ranch. The young one was Jake. The older was Pete." Mr. Chen's face was tight. "Don't let them rattle you. Cowboys like to talk big." "The account? Is it really that high?" "High enough." Mr. Chen sighed. "Caleb Thorne runs cattle about 10 miles north. Good man mostly, honest, but he's had a hard couple of years. Drought killed half his herd last summer, and he's been trying to rebuild ever since. He pays what he can when he can. And if he can't, then I eat the loss." Mr. Chen shrugged. "That's the way it works out here. You extend credit or you don't sell to half the town. Just have to hope people's word is worth something." Vivian thought about Edgar, whose word had been wrapped in promises that felt like threats, whose honesty had been performative, designed to impress. Out here, apparently, a man's word was currency. She wasn't sure if that was better or worse. The rest of the day passed without incident. More customers came and went. Vivian worked until her body screamed for rest, then worked some more. By the time Mr. Chen finally locked the door at sunset, she could barely climb the stairs to her room. She collapsed on her bed fully clothed and was asleep before dark. The pattern repeated itself. Days blurred together. Wake at dawn, sweep, stock, serve customers, eat standing up, work until sunset, collapse. Vivian's hands blistered, then calloused. Her feet toughened. Her back stopped aching quite so much. She learned the rhythm of Red Hollow. The ranchers who came in every week for supplies. The prospectors who drifted through and never stayed. The women who bought fabric and traded gossip. The children who pressed their noses against the candy jar. She learned that Mr. Chen was harder than he looked, that he'd come to Wyoming 30 years ago with nothing and built the store from scratch. That Lynn had been a mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English and learned by sheer stubborn will. That they'd had 3 children, 2 of whom had died young, and the surviving daughter had married her rancher and moved away because Red Hollow was too small for her ambitions. She learned that the saloon across the street was owned by a man named Silas Vane, who everyone spoke about in careful tones. That the blacksmith was named Otto and had come from Germany and could fix anything made of metal. That the woman with the twin boys was named Martha, not the Martha from the train, a different Martha, and that her husband had died in a mining accident and she was raising the boys alone on seamstress work. Red Hollow was smaller than a single block of Boston, but it contained entire worlds. 3 weeks into her new life, Vivian was carrying a crate of canned goods from the back room when the door opened and a man walked in she hadn't seen before. He was tall, lean, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that took in the whole room before settling on Mr. Chen. "Chen! Thorne!" Mr. Chen looked up from his ledger. "Didn't expect you today." "Needed to talk." The man, Thorne, pulled an envelope from his pocket and set it on the counter. "That's half of what I owe. I'll have the rest by end of month." Mr. Chen opened the envelope, counted the bills inside, then looked up with something like surprise. "This is more than half." "It's what I can spare right now." Thorne's voice was quiet, controlled. "I know I've been running late. Won't happen again." "I appreciate it." Mr. Chen made a note in his ledger. "You need anything while you're here?" "No, just wanted to square things up." That was when Thorne noticed Vivian. His gaze shifted, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw curiosity there, and something else, a weariness she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror. "You're the new assistant," he said. "Yes." "Vivian Hale." "Caleb Thorne." He nodded, then turned back to Mr. Chen. "I'll be back end of month." He left before Vivian could say anything else. "That's the man who owes you money?" she asked. "That's him. Runs the biggest ranch in the territory, but you wouldn't know it to look at him." Mr. Chen's expression was softer than usual. "Lost his wife 3 years back. Been running the place alone ever since, just him and his hands. It's not easy." Vivian watched through the window as Caleb Thorne mounted a dappled gray horse and rode north. There was something about the way he sat the saddle, straight but not stiff, easy but not careless, that spoke of a man who'd spent his life in motion. She went back to stocking shelves and tried not to think about it. But she did think about it. That night, lying in bed, she found herself wondering about Caleb Thorne, about his ranch, about what kind of man paid his debts when he didn't have to, when half the town probably wouldn't notice or care. The kind of man Edgar would never be, she thought. Then she forced herself to stop thinking and went to sleep. A month passed, then 6 weeks. Vivian fell into the life like someone learning to swim, awkward at first, then competent, then almost natural. She could stack shelves without thinking now, could calculate sums in her head, could handle difficult customers with the same calm efficiency she'd once used to navigate Boston dinner parties. The town accepted her in the way small towns did, slowly, with caution, but eventually with a kind of casual inclusion that felt more real than anything she'd known back east. Women started asking her opinion on fabric. Men tipped their hats when she swept the front step. Children waved when they passed. She was becoming part of Red Hollow. It was early October when the weather turned. Vivian woke one morning to find frost on her window and clouds building in the north. By noon, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. By evening, the first snow was falling. "Storm coming," Mr. Chen said, watching the sky. "Big one, maybe. You ever see a Wyoming winter?" "No." "Then you're in for an education." He started pulling shutters closed. "We'll likely lose power if the wind gets bad. Make sure the lamps are filled." Vivian had never prepared for a storm before. In Boston, storms meant staying inside, maybe losing a tree branch, inconvenience, but not danger. Here, the way Mr. Chen moved, quick, efficient, serious, told her this was something else entirely. By midnight, the wind was howling. Snow drove against the windows in waves. The store shook. Vivian huddled in her room under every blanket she owned and listened to the building groan. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally broke, Red Hollow was buried under 3 feet of snow. Vivian helped Mr. Chen dig out the front door, then spent hours shoveling the front step and the path to the street. Her shoulders screamed. Her lungs burned in the cold air. But when she was done, she looked at the cleared path and felt something close to pride. She was surviving. Not just running anymore, actually surviving. That afternoon, a rider came into town leading a riderless horse. Vivian was inside warming her hands by the stove when she heard shouting. She went to the window and saw a crowd gathering in the street. "Someone got thrown," Mr. Chen said, joining her. "Looks bad." They went outside. The rider was one of Thorne's men, Pete, the older cowboy. He was pale, his face tight with worry. "Storm spooked the horses," he was telling Otto the blacksmith. "Caleb's mare bolted, threw him hard. We got him back to the ranch, but he needs a doctor." "Doc Patterson's in Cheyenne," Otto said. "Won't be back till next week." "Next week might be too late. He hit his head, can't stay awake. We don't know what to do." The crowd murmured. Vivian felt something cold settle in her stomach. She barely knew Caleb Thorne, had met him once, spoken maybe 10 words. But the image of him riding away on that gray horse stuck in her mind, and the thought of him lying hurt and alone made her chest tighten. "I can help," a woman's voice said. Everyone turned. It was Martha, the seamstress. "I've nursed head injuries before. If you can get me to the ranch, I'll do what I can." "It's 10 miles in this snow," Pete said, "and the road's half gone." "Then we'd better leave now." Vivian heard herself speak before she knew she was going to. "I'll come too. Extra hands can't hurt." Everyone stared at her. Mr. Chen frowned. "You ever ridden a horse?" "No." "Ever been in snow like this?" "No." "Then you'll be more liability than help." He was right. Vivian knew he was right. She had no skills for this, no experience, nothing to offer, but a vague sense that sitting in town while someone suffered felt wrong. But Martha was already nodding. "She can ride with me. I'll keep her safe." Pete looked between them, then at the sky. "We're losing light. If you're coming, we leave now." They left. Vivian had no time to prepare, no time to think. She grabbed her coat, her warmest shawl, and climbed onto Martha's horse, sitting behind the saddle and holding on for dear life. The ride was brutal. The horse struggled through snow that came up to its chest. The wind cut through Vivian's coat like it was paper. Her fingers went numb. Her face burned with cold. She clung to Martha's waist and tried not to think about falling, about freezing, about how insane this was. But Martha rode like she'd been born to it, steady and sure, following Pete's horse through the white landscape. And gradually, the landscape changed. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, then to a valley with a frozen creek running through it. And there, at the edge of the valley, was the ranch. It was smaller than Vivian had imagined. A main house, a barn, a few outbuildings, all of it looking weathered and tired. Smoke rose from the house's chimney. As they approached, the door opened and another cowboy, Jake, the young one, stepped out. "About time," he said. "He's in bad shape." They dismounted and hurried inside. The house was sparse, rough furniture, bare walls, a fire in the hearth. And on a bed in the corner, covered in blankets, was Caleb Thorne. He looked worse than Vivian had imagined. His face was pale, a bruise spreading across his temple. His breathing was shallow. When Martha knelt beside him and said his name, his eyes opened but didn't seem to focus. "Caleb, can you hear me?" "Yeah." His voice was barely a whisper. "Storm, the horses. The horses are fine. You're the one we're worried about." Martha pulled back the blanket, checked his pupils, felt his pulse. "How long has he been like this?" "Since this morning," Jake said. "Happened around dawn. We got him inside, tried to keep him warm, but he keeps drifting off." "That's the problem." Martha looked at Vivian. "We need to keep him awake. Can you talk to him?" "About what?" "Anything. Just keep him engaged." Vivian moved to the bedside, her heart pounding. She'd never done anything like this. Had no idea what to say to a half-conscious rancher she barely knew. But Martha was already mixing something in a cup, and Jake and Pete were hovering nearby looking helpless, and someone had to do something. She knelt beside the bed. "Mr. Thorne, can you hear me?" His eyes opened again, found her face. "You're Chen's assistant." "That's right, Vivian." "Why are you here?" "Because you got hurt, and I'm apparently terrible at minding my own business." It came out sharper than she intended, but his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough. Martha's going to help you, but you need to stay awake. Can you do that?" "Trying. Try harder." Vivian had no idea where the authority in her voice was coming from, but it seemed to work. His eyes focused a little more. "You're bossy for an assistant, and you're stubborn for someone with a head injury." This time, he definitely smiled. Then his eyes started to close again. "No." Vivian touched his shoulder. "Stay with me. Tell me about your ranch." "Not much to tell." "Tell me anyway." So he did. Haltingly, with long pauses, but he talked. About the cattle. About the drought that had nearly destroyed him. About the mortgage he was fighting to pay off. About his wife, Sarah, who died in childbirth along with their son. About how he'd almost given up after that, but the ranch was all he had left, so he kept going. Vivian listened and asked questions and kept him talking. Martha worked beside them, cleaning the wound, wrapping his head, making him drink something bitter that made him grimace. The hours blurred together. The fire needed tending. Someone made coffee. The storm picked up again outside, rattling the windows. And through it all, Vivian stayed beside Caleb Thorne and kept him awake. Sometime after midnight, his eyes finally stayed open without her prompting. His color was better. His breathing had steadied. "I think he's through the worst of it," Martha said quietly. "But someone needs to watch him tonight." "I'll do it," Vivian heard herself say. Martha raised an eyebrow. "You sure? It's going to be a long night." "I'm sure." So Martha and the Cowboys bedded down in the barn, and Vivian sat in a chair by Caleb's bed and watched the fire burn low. Around 3 a.m, he spoke. "You should sleep." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." "So are you." He turned his head to look at her. In the firelight, his eyes were dark, unreadable. "Why'd you come out here?" It was a good question. Vivian didn't have a good answer. "I don't know. It seemed like the right thing to do." "That's a terrible reason to risk your life." "Maybe." She met his gaze. "But it's my reason." They were quiet for a while. Then Caleb said, "You're not from here." "No." "Running from something?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I figured. You've got the look." "What look?" "Someone who knows what it's like to have the walls close in." He closed his eyes. "I had that look once too." Vivian wanted to ask what he meant, but his breathing had deepened, steadied. He was asleep. Real sleep this time, not the dangerous drift of before. She sat back in her chair and watched him breathe and felt something shift inside her. She'd come to Wyoming to escape, to run, to disappear. But sitting here in this drafty ranch house, keeping vigil over a man she barely knew, she realized she'd done something else entirely. She'd started to fight. Morning came gray and cold. Vivian woke in the chair with her neck cramped and her back screaming. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back, the ride through the snow, Caleb's injury, the long night keeping watch. She sat up quickly and looked at the bed. He was awake, watching her. "You stayed," he said. "Someone had to." Her voice came out rough. "How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a horse." He tried to sit up, winced, and settled back down. "Which is about right." "Don't move too fast. Martha said you need to rest." "Can't rest. There's work to do." "The work can wait." "No, it can't." He pushed himself up on his elbows, his jaw tight. "I've got cattle to feed, fences to check, a ranch that doesn't run itself. You've also got a head injury that could kill you if you're stupid about it." Vivian stood and crossed her arms. "Your men can handle things for a few days." "My men are already stretched thin." Caleb swung his legs over the side of the bed, moving carefully. "I appreciate what you did, Miss Hale. Really. But I know my limits." "Do you?" She heard the edge in her voice and didn't care. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who'd rather die than ask for help." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed across his face, surprise maybe, or recognition, like he'd heard that observation before and hadn't liked it any better the first time. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. You're right. I don't. Vivian moved toward the door. But I know what I saw last night, and if you think I rode 10 miles through a blizzard just to watch you kill yourself out of pride, you're wrong. She walked out before he could respond. Outside, the morning was bright and brutal. Snow covered everything, turning the ranch into something from a picture book. Jake was by the barn, feeding horses. He looked up when Vivian approached. How is he? Awake, stubborn, planning to work. Jake snorted. Yeah, that sounds like Caleb. You tell him that's a bad idea? I tried. Well, you got farther than most. He doesn't take advice easy. Jake threw another forkful of hay into a stall. You did good last night. Martha said he might not have made it without you. Vivian didn't know what to say to that. She'd never saved anyone's life before. Never done anything that mattered in that immediate, tangible way. It felt strange and frightening and somehow right all at once. I should get back to town, she said. Mr. Chen will be wondering where I am. Road's still bad, but Pete can take you. He's heading that way anyway for supplies. Jake paused. You planning to come back? Why would I? Because Caleb's going to need help whether he admits it or not. And you seem like the kind of person who doesn't leave a job half done. It was an accurate read. Vivian had spent her whole life finishing things. Piano lessons she hated, needlework that bored her, social obligations that felt like torture. She'd been raised to see things through. The irony that she'd run from her own wedding wasn't lost on her. I'll think about it, she said. Pete rode her back to Red Hollow in silence, the horse picking its way carefully through snowdrifts that came up to its knees. By the time they reached town, Vivian's legs were numb, and her face felt like leather. She slid off the horse and nearly fell. Easy, Pete said. You all right? Fine, just cold. Get inside and warm up. And Miss Hale? He tipped his hat. Thanks for what you did. She watched him ride away, then turned and saw Mr. Chen standing in the doorway of the store, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I can explain, she started. You left without telling me. Rode into a storm with people you barely know. Stayed overnight at a man's ranch. Mr. Chen's voice was flat. What exactly do you think you're going to explain? Vivian's throat tightened. I'm sorry. I should have asked permission. Permission? Mr. Chen shook his head. You're not my daughter, Miss Hale. You're my employee. I don't control where you go or what you do. But I do expect you to show up for work if you're planning to keep this job. I'll make up the hours. See that you do. He stepped aside to let her in. And next time you decide to play nurse, at least tell me so I don't spend the night wondering if you froze to death. Something in his voice, concern, not anger, made Vivian's eyes sting. I will. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing and get to work. She did. The store had been closed all morning, and there was a backlog of everything. Vivian swept and stocked and served customers until her hands stopped shaking from the cold. People asked where she'd been, and when she told them, their attitudes shifted. The women looked at her with new respect. The men nodded approval. By the time the sun set, Vivian felt like she'd earned back her place in Red Hollow's strange, precarious community. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she couldn't stop thinking about Caleb Thorne, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd called out his pride, about the weariness in his voice when he'd talked about his wife and his almost surrender, about how he'd thanked her but hadn't asked her to stay. She fell asleep wondering if she'd see him again. The answer came 2 days later when Caleb himself walked into the store. His face was still pale, the bruise on his temple an ugly yellow-green, but he was upright and moving under his own power. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Chen said, surprised. Should you be out of bed? Probably not. Caleb's eyes found Vivian behind the counter. But I needed to settle my account, and I wanted to thank Miss Hale properly. You don't need to thank me, Vivian said. Yeah, I do. He pulled an envelope from his coat and set it on the counter. This covers what I owe, plus the supplies my men picked up during the storm. Mr. Chen opened it, counted, then looked up with raised eyebrows. This is more than your balance. Consider it a deposit on future purchases. Caleb turned to Vivian. Can I talk to you? Outside? Vivian glanced at Mr. Chen, who shrugged. She untied her apron and followed Caleb into the street. The air was cold but clear, the snow melting in patches under a weak sun. Caleb walked a few paces away from the store, then stopped and turned to face her. "I was an ass the other morning," he said. "Yes, you were." He smiled slightly. "Not going to argue?" "You were there. You know what you said. Fair enough." He looked down at his boots, then back up. "The truth is, I'm not good at accepting help. Haven't been for a long time. And when you called me on it, it hit harder than I wanted to admit. Because it was true? Because I've heard it before. From Sarah. From my foreman before he quit. From just about everyone who's tried to care about me." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I keep thinking if I work hard enough, if I handle everything myself, I can fix what's broken. But all I'm doing is wearing myself down." Vivian understood that impulse better than he knew. "So what are you going to do about it?" "That's why I'm here." Caleb met her eyes. "My ranch needs help, real help. Someone who can manage books, handle accounts, keep things organized while I focus on the cattle and the land. The pay isn't much and the work's hard, but it's honest. And I figure someone who is brave enough, or crazy enough, to ride through a blizzard might be brave enough to take the job." Vivian stared at him. "You're offering me work at your ranch?" "If you want it." "I already have a job." "I know. And if you're happy here, that's fine. But if you're looking for something different, something that might give you more independence down the line, I'm offering." He paused. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. Think about it. Talk to Chen. Just know the offer's real." He tipped his hat and walked away before she could respond. Vivian stood in the street watching him go, her mind spinning. Work at the ranch. Leave the store. Trade the safety she'd built here for something unknown. Everything in her screamed no. She'd just found stability, just started to feel like maybe she could make a life in Red Hollow. Leaving now would be throwing that away for a risk that might not pay off. But another part of her, the part that had torn off a wedding dress and run, whispered yes. She went inside. Mr. Chen was watching her from behind the counter. "He offer you a job?" "How did you know?" "Because Caleb Thorne's not a fool, and you're the hardest worker I've had in 5 years. Mr. Chen set down his pencil. "You going to take it?" "I don't know. I don't want to leave you without help. I managed before you. I'll manage after." His expression softened slightly. "You've been good for this store, Miss Hale, but I'm not blind. I see how you look at those account books, how you handle the customers who try to cheat me, how you've already reorganized half my inventory to make more sense. You're too smart to spend your life stocking shelves." "There's nothing wrong with stocking shelves." "No, there isn't, but there's nothing right about wasting potential either." He picked up his pencil again. "Think about it. If you decide to go, give me a week to find someone else. That's all I ask." Vivian nodded, her throat tight. That night, she made a list. Reasons to stay, reasons to go. The reasons to stay were practical. Steady pay, safe housing, work she understood. The reasons to go were harder to articulate. Freedom, growth, the chance to build something that was hers. By morning, she still hadn't decided. The decision was made for her 2 days later when a man walked into the store Vivian had never seen before. He was well dressed by Red Hollow standards, clean shirt, pressed trousers, polished boots. His hair was dark and slicked back, his face handsome in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of Edgar. He looked around the store with an expression that suggested he owned it, then his eyes landed on Vivian. "Well," he said, "who do we have here?" Mr. Chen appeared from the back room, and his face went carefully blank. "Silas." "Chen." The man, Silas, smiled. "I heard you hired new help, didn't realize she'd be this pretty." Vivian felt ice slide down her spine. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm sure you can." Silas approached the counter, his movements smooth, predatory. "I'm Silas Vane. I own the saloon across the street, and several other businesses in town." "Congratulations." His smile widened. "You're new here, so maybe you don't know how things work. But in Red Hollow, I make it my business to know everyone, especially interesting newcomers." He leaned against the counter. "Vivian Hale, isn't it? From Boston, running from an arranged marriage. Quite the story." Vivian's blood went cold. "How do you—" "I have connections, friends in other towns, people who hear things." Silas's voice was pleasant, conversational, but his eyes were hard. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, as long as we're friendly." We're done here, Mr. Chen said sharply. You need supplies. Buy them. Otherwise, get out. Silas straightened, his smile never wavering. No need to be rude, Chen. I'm just being neighborly. He tipped his hat to Vivian. I'm sure we'll see each other again, Miss Hale. Red Hollow's a small town. He left. The silence he left behind felt poisonous. How much does he know? Vivian asked quietly. More than he should. Mr. Chen's jaw was tight. Silas Vane's a snake. Came to Red Hollow 5 years ago, bought the saloon, started expanding. Now he owns half the businesses in town and has his fingers in everything else. He preys on people's weaknesses. What does he want? What men like him always want, control. Mr. Chen looked at her. You need to be careful around him. He's dangerous in ways that aren't always obvious. Vivian thought about Edgar, about the way he'd smiled and made threats sound like compliments, about how he'd isolated her slowly, cutting her off from friends, from choices, until she'd had nowhere to run but across a continent. She recognized the pattern. That night, she wrote a letter to Caleb Thorne accepting his job offer. The transition happened fast. Mr. Chen found a replacement within 3 days, a widow named Anne who needed work and had experience. Vivian trained her, packed her few belongings, and prepared to leave Red Hollow. On her last morning at the store, Lin Chen pressed a package into her hands. Inside was a warm coat, better than anything Vivian owned, with a note in careful English. You will need this. Stay safe. Vivian hugged her, surprised by the tears in her own eyes. Caleb sent Jake to fetch her. The ride to the ranch was easier this time, the road mostly clear, the weather holding. But as they rode, Jake talked. You should know what you're walking into, he said. Caleb's a good boss, but the ranch is struggling. We lost cattle in the drought, lost more to rustlers last summer. The mortgage payment's coming due, and I'm not sure we can make it. Does Caleb know you're telling me this? No, but you should know anyway. Jake glanced at her. He's betting a lot on you. Thinks if he can get the books in order, find where the money's going wrong, he might have a shot. But if you can't fix it, we might all be out of work by spring. No pressure then, Jake grinned. Welcome to ranching. The ranch looked different in daylight without snow. Vivian could see its bones now, the way the barn leaned slightly, the missing shingles on the house, the fences that needed repair. But she could also see its potential. Good water from the creek, rich grazing land, solid construction under the weir. Caleb met her at the house. You came. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He gestured inside. I've got the books ready. Fair warning, they're a mess. That was an understatement. The ranch's financial records were chaos. Receipts mixed with invoices, payments recorded sporadically, debts that might or might not be real. Vivian sat at Caleb's kitchen table and spread everything out, trying to make sense of it. After an hour, she looked up. When was the last time you balanced these? Sarah used to handle it after she died. He shrugged. I kept meaning to, never found the time. 3 years of unbalanced books. Vivian rubbed her temples. This is going to take weeks. I've got weeks. The mortgage payment isn't due till January. That's 3 months away. Exactly. Vivian looked at the papers, then at Caleb. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or desperation disguised as calm. I'll need complete access to everything. Bank statements, sale records, purchase orders, payroll, no secrets. You'll have it. And if I find something you don't like, then we deal with it. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. I'm not hiring you to make me feel good, Miss Hale. I'm hiring you to save my ranch, whatever it takes. Vivian nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. The first week was brutal. Vivian worked from dawn to well past dark, sorting through 3 years of financial neglect. She found unpaid invoices, double payments, debts. Caleb didn't know he'd accrued. The ranch's finances were bleeding from a dozen different wounds, and no one had bothered to apply pressure. But she also found assets. Cattle sold for more than recorded. Land that could be leased, equipment that could be sold. The ranch wasn't dying. It was drowning in disorganization. Caleb gave her space to work but checked in each evening. They'd sit at the kitchen table after supper, and Vivian would walk him through what she'd found. He listened without interrupting, asked sharp questions, and trusted her judgment in ways Edgar never had. You're good at this, he said one night. I had good teachers. Vivian didn't elaborate. Talking about Boston felt like reopening a wound. Still, you could have done this anywhere. Why come all the way out here? She looked at him. In the lamplight, his face was tired but honest. Because anywhere else, I'd still be running. Here, I can build something. Even if it fails? Even then. Something shifted between them. Not romance. Neither of them was ready for that. But respect. Partnership. The recognition that they were both fighting the same fight, just on different fronts. A month into her work, Vivian had the books balanced and a plan drafted. The ranch could survive if they cut costs, sold off non-essential equipment, and focused on breeding rather than buying cattle. It would be tight, but possible. She presented the plan to Caleb and his men around the kitchen table. They listened, asked questions, then Jake whistled low. "It could work," he said. "It'll have to." Caleb looked at Vivian. "You're sure about these numbers?" "As sure as I can be with the information I have." "Then we do it." He stood. "Jake, Pete, start inventorying the equipment. Anything we haven't used in a year gets sold. Miss Hale, I need you to draft letters to our creditors. See if we can negotiate lower payments until spring." They scattered to work. Vivian was writing the first letter when someone knocked on the door. Caleb answered it. Standing on the porch was Silas Vane. "Thorne," Silas said pleasantly. "Got a minute?" Every muscle in Vivian's body tensed. Caleb's expression went hard. "What do you want, Vane?" "Just being neighborly. Heard you hired Miss Hale here. Thought I'd come by and make sure she was settling in all right." Silas's eyes found Vivian through the doorway. "How are you finding ranch life, Miss Hale?" "Fine, thank you." "Good, good. It's hard work, I imagine, especially for someone with your background." He smiled. "I was actually hoping I could talk to you privately. Business proposition." "She's not interested," Caleb said. "I wasn't asking you." Silas's tone stayed pleasant, but the threat underneath was clear. "Miss Hale can speak for herself." Vivian stood and walked to the door. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind where you come work for me instead. Better pay, easier work, more opportunities." His smile widened. "You're wasted out here playing bookkeeper for a failing ranch. I could use someone with your skills in town." "My skills are fine where they are." "Are they?" Silas leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Because I know what you're running from, Miss Hale. And I know what happens to women who don't have protection out here. One word from me in the right ears and your past catches up fast." Vivian felt Caleb move behind her, but she held up a hand. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Vane?" "I'm offering you a choice. Work for me willingly or work for me unwillingly. Either way, you're too valuable to waste on a dead man's ranch." Caleb's fist caught Silas square in the jaw. The saloon owner stumbled back, blood streaming from his nose. For a moment, shock crossed his face, then rage. "You're going to regret that, Thorne. Get off my land!" Silas wiped blood from his face, looked at Vivian with something cold and calculating, then walked to his horse. But before he mounted, he turned back. "This ranch is finished. Your mortgage comes due in 3 months, and I know for a fact you can't make the payment. When you lose it, I'll be waiting to buy. And Miss Hale?" He smiled through bloody teeth. "I'll be waiting for you too." He rode away. Caleb stood on the porch, breathing hard, his hand already swelling. "You shouldn't have done that," Vivian said quietly. "Yes, I should have." "He'll retaliate. Let him try." Caleb looked at her. "You're under my protection now. That means something out here." Vivian wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need protection, didn't want to be anyone's responsibility. But she'd seen the look in Silas Vane's eyes. She knew what men like him were capable of. "Thank you," she said instead. That night, lying in the small room Caleb had given her off the kitchen, Vivian stared at the ceiling and tried not to panic. She'd thought leaving Boston meant leaving behind men who wanted to control her. But power was power, whether it wore Edgar's expensive suits or Silas Vane's frontier smile. The difference was, this time she wasn't alone. Silas's retaliation came fast and quiet, the way poison works. 3 days after Caleb hit him, the ranch's credit was cut off at every store in Red Hollow except Chen's. A week later, 2 of Caleb's cattle buyers suddenly had other commitments. By the end of the month, Jake rode in from town with news that made Caleb's face go white. "The bank examiner's coming early," Jake said, dropping into a chair at the kitchen table. "January deadline's been moved up to December 15th. "They can't do that," Vivian looked up from the ledger she'd been reviewing. The mortgage terms are fixed. Apparently Vane called in a favor. Bank president owes him for something, and now they're claiming some technical violation in the original agreement. Jake shook his head. It's all legal enough that we can't fight it. We've got 6 weeks instead of 3 months. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked outside without a word. Vivian found him by the creek, staring at the water. The December cold had turned the edges to ice, and their breath came out in clouds. We can't make it, he said quietly. Even with everything you've done, we needed those extra weeks. How much are we short? $800. Might as well be $8,000. Vivian did the math in her head. They'd cut costs to the bone, sold off equipment, negotiated lower payments. There was nothing left to trim, nothing left to sell except the cattle, and selling breeding stock now would gut the ranch's future. What if we borrowed it? From who? Vane owns or controls every source of credit in town. Caleb's voice was flat, defeated. He's been working toward this for months, maybe longer, and I was too stupid to see it. This isn't about stupidity. No, it's about power. He wants this land, and he wants you, and he's willing to destroy everything to get both. Caleb turned to face her. You should leave. Go back to Chen's or head to Cheyenne. Anywhere but here. No. Vivian, I said no. She stepped closer. I didn't run from Boston just to run again, and I didn't come to this ranch to watch you give up. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Realistic is finding another way. Giving up is walking away. She grabbed his arm. You said this ranch was all you had left, so fight for it. With what? With me. With Jake and Pete. With everyone in Red Hollow who's tired of Silas Vane taking what he wants. Vivian's voice rose. He thinks we're alone. Let's prove him wrong. Caleb looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The ember of fight that hadn't quite died. You have a plan? The start of one. She didn't, not really, but she'd learned that sometimes momentum mattered more than certainty. First, we need to know exactly what Vane's done. Who he's threatened, what he's promised, where his leverage is. Then we figure out how to break it. That night, Vivian rode into Red Hollow with Jake. She went to Chen's first. The old man was closing up when they arrived, but his face brightened when he saw her. Miss Hale, I heard about Thorne's trouble. It's Vane's doing. Of course it is. Chen locked the door behind them. That man's been tightening his grip for years. Started small, bought the saloon, then the boarding house, then shares in the bank. Now he controls half the town and influences the other half. What does he want with Caleb's ranch? Water rights. Thorne's land sits on the best creek in the territory. Control that, you control everyone downstream. Chen poured 2 cups of tea. But it's more than that. Vane wants dominance. He wants people to know he can take what he wants when he wants it. And he uses people's vulnerabilities to do it. Exactly. Chen's expression darkened. 6 months ago, Martha, the seamstress, needed money for her boys. Vane loaned it to her at rates that'll keep her in debt forever. The blacksmith, Otto, got into trouble with a gambling debt. Vane paid it off, and now Otto does whatever he's told. It's the same pattern everywhere. Find someone desperate, offer help, then own them. Vivian thought about Edgar, about how he'd courted her father first, offering business connections and social advantages before ever pursuing her. How he'd isolated her from friends by hosting parties they couldn't afford to reciprocate. How he'd made himself essential before making his demands. He's done this before, she said quietly. Probably. Chen studied her. But you're not asking me this just for information. What are you planning? I'm going to talk to the people he's controlling, see if any of them are willing to stand up. That's dangerous. I know. Vane doesn't like being challenged. I know that too. Vivian met his eyes. But what's the alternative? Let him win? Let him take the ranch and keep terrorizing this town? Someone has to push back. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a small, fierce expression. You remind me of my daughter. Same stubbornness. He stood. Talk to Martha first. She's got the most to lose, but she's also the bravest person I know. If you can convince her, others might follow. Martha's house was small, tucked behind the general store, with a garden plot that would be green in summer but was barren now. Vivian knocked on the door, and one of the twin boys answered. She still couldn't tell them apart. "Is your mother home?" The boy nodded and disappeared. A moment later, Martha appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was tired, lined with worry. "Vivian, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you about Silas Vane." Martha's expression closed down. "I can't help you." "You haven't heard what I'm asking." "Doesn't matter. I can't cross Vane. I've got my boys to think about." "I know." Vivian lowered her voice. "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" Martha hesitated, then stepped aside. The house's interior was clean but sparse. The boys played with wooden blocks in the corner. Martha gestured Vivian to a chair at a small table. "Make it quick. If Vane hears you were here—" "What will he do?" Vivian asked. "Raise your debt? He's already got you trapped. What more can he take?" Martha's face went pale. "You don't understand. He owns the note on this house. If I cross him, my boys and I are on the street. And if you don't cross him, how long before the debt's paid off? 5 years? 10? Never?" Vivian leaned forward. "You're already losing, Martha. We all are. The only question is whether we lose alone or together. Together gets us killed. Maybe, or maybe it's the only way we survive." Vivian pulled out a piece of paper, a list she'd made of everyone Vane had leverage over. "Chen told me about your debt, Otto's too, and the widow Anne who replaced me at the store, and the rancher south of town who couldn't pay his hands last season. Vane's got his hooks in all of you, but what if you all stopped paying at once?" Martha stared at her. "That's insane." "Is it? What's he going to do, foreclose on everyone simultaneously, throw half the town out? The territorial marshal would have to investigate. And if that investigation found evidence of predatory lending, fraud, coercion—" Vivian let the thought hang. "You're talking about bringing in the law. Law doesn't care about people like us. The law cares about patterns, about evidence, about enough people telling the same story that it can't be ignored." Vivian put her hand on Martha's. "I'm not asking you to fight alone. I'm asking you to stand with others. There's a difference." Martha looked at her boys, then back at Vivian. "Even if I wanted to help, what could I do? I'm just a seamstress. You're a woman who knows everyone in this town, who they trust, who they listen to." Vivian squeezed her hand. "Talk to people. Quietly. Find out who else is tired of being Vane's puppet. We'll meet, somewhere safe, and figure out what we can prove. And if we can't prove anything, then at least we tried." Martha was silent for a long time. One of the boys brought her a wooden horse, and she smiled at him, stroked his hair. When she looked back at Vivian, her eyes were wet but determined. "I'll talk to people, but I'm not making any promises. That's all I'm asking." Over the next 2 weeks, Vivian and Martha worked in secret. They met at Martha's house after dark, comparing notes, building a list of people Vane had manipulated. The pattern was clear. He targeted the vulnerable, offered help that became chains, then used those chains to expand his control. But proving it was harder. Vane was careful. His contracts were legal, his interest rates just barely within territorial limits. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Then Otto gave them the break they needed. The blacksmith showed up at Martha's house one night, his face grim. "I've got something. Don't know if it helps, but it's worth showing you." He spread out a ledger on the table. "Vane keeps 2 sets of books. One for the bank, one for himself. I saw them when I was shoeing his horse last week. He left them out in his office. This is the real one." Vivian scanned the pages. Her breath caught. The numbers told a story of systematic fraud, loans recorded at one rate, collected at another. Debts marked paid that were still being collected, properties transferred through shell companies to hide Vane's ownership. "This is it," she breathed. "This is what we need." "There's more." Otto flipped to the back pages. He's got notes here about the bank examiner, about how he bribed him to move up Thorne's deadline, names, dates, amounts. Jake, who'd been standing guard at the door, whistled low. "If this gets to the territorial marshal—" "Vane's finished," Vivian finished. "But we need to get it there without him knowing." "The marshal's in Cheyenne," Martha said. 3 days' ride." "Then someone needs to ride tonight." Vivian looked at Jake. "Can you do it?" "I can try. But what about the ranch? If I'm gone and something happens—" "Pete and I can hold down the fort," Vivian said. She was surprised by her own confidence. 2 months ago, she couldn't have imagined saying those words. Now they felt true. You sure? No, but we're doing it anyway. Jake left within the hour, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in his saddlebag. Vivian rode back to the ranch with her heart hammering. They'd made their move. Now they had to survive the consequences. The consequences came at dawn 3 days later. Vivian woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted out of bed, threw open her door, and saw orange light flickering through the kitchen windows. Fire. She ran outside in her nightgown and bare feet. The barn was burning, flames already climbing the walls. Pete was there with buckets, trying to fight it, but it was useless. The fire was too big, too fast. "The horses!" Vivian screamed. "Already out!" Pete shouted back. "I got them to the corral, but the hay's gone and the tack and—" A gunshot cracked the air. Pete dropped. Vivian's mind went blank with terror. She ran to him, fell to her knees. Blood was spreading across his shoulder, but he was breathing. "Get inside," he gasped. "Get Caleb. They're coming." She looked up and saw riders approaching through the smoke. 5 men, all armed. Leading them was Silas Vane. Vivian ran for the house. Caleb was already up, rifle in hand, his face set. "Pete's shot," she said. "Vane's here." "I know. Get down to the cellar. There's a tunnel. Sarah and I built it in case of Indian attacks. Goes out past the creek." "I'm not leaving you." "Vivian, I'm not leaving." She grabbed the shotgun from over the door. "Where do you keep the shells?" Caleb stared at her for half a second, then pointed to a drawer. "You know how to load that?" "I can learn fast." He showed her, break the barrel, slide in the shells, snap it closed. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his eyes stayed on her face. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Vivian's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "This is my fight, too." Outside, Vane called out, "Thorne, come on out and we can settle this peaceful." Caleb moved to the window. "Nothing peaceful about burning a man's barn and shooting his foreman. Pete'll live if he gets to a doctor soon," and the barn was just encouragement. Vane's voice was smooth, reasonable. "You're done, Thorne. Bank's foreclosing today. This land's mine. You can walk away with your life or die defending property that's already lost. Your choice." "The marshal's on his way," Caleb called back, "with evidence of fraud and bribery. Your little empire's about to collapse." There was a pause. Then Vane laughed. "You sent that boy with Otto's ledger?" "I know. Had men watching the blacksmith for weeks. Jake never made it to Cheyenne." Vivian's stomach dropped. "He's lying," she whispered. "Maybe." Caleb's jaw was tight. "Or maybe we're out of moves. We've still got this house and these guns. Against 5 armed men? You got a better idea?" Before Caleb could answer, gunfire erupted. Windows shattered. Wood splintered. Vivian dropped to the floor, her heart trying to break through her ribs. Caleb returned fire, methodical and calm. "Stay low. Don't shoot unless you've got a clear target." The siege settled into a rhythm, bursts of gunfire, then silence, then more shots. Vane's men were trying to flush them out, but the house was solid, and Caleb knew every angle. "They'll rush us eventually," he said during a lull, "when they realize we're not coming out. Then we make them regret it." Caleb looked at her, and despite everything, the burning barn, the blood, the fear, he smiled. "You're something else. You know that?" "I've been told." The rush came an hour later. 2 men charged the front door while 3 circled to the back. Caleb took down one at the front with a rifle shot that made Vivian's ears ring. The man fell and didn't move. The back door crashed open. A man burst through, gun raised. Vivian didn't think. She lifted the shotgun and fired. The recoil nearly broke her shoulder. The blast was deafening. The man went down screaming, clutching his leg. Vivian stared at what she'd done, frozen. She'd hurt someone. Maybe killed someone. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Vivian!" Caleb's voice cut through. "Reload! Now!" She fumbled the shells, dropped one, managed to load the other. Her vision was tunneling. This was nothing like Boston. Nothing like anything she'd imagined. Another man came through the back. Caleb shot him. Then another at the front. The house filled with smoke and noise and the sharp smell of gunpowder. Then suddenly, it stopped. Vivian's ears rang in the silence. She could hear her own breathing, harsh and fast. Caleb was at the window, rifle ready. "They're pulling back," he said. "Why?" "Don't know." Maybe we hurt them worse than we thought. Maybe hoofbeats, lots of them. Vivian risked a look through the shattered window and saw riders coming from the direction of town. 8, 10, 12 of them. Reinforcements, she said, despair washing through her. But Caleb was laughing, actually laughing. Look at who's leading them. She looked. At the front of the group, riding hard, was Jake. And beside him, wearing a marshal's badge, was a tall man with iron-gray hair. Behind them came half of Red Hollow, Chen, Martha, Otto, ranchers and shopkeepers and ordinary people who'd decided they were done being afraid. Vane saw them, too. He tried to run, but his horse reared when Jake fired a warning shot. The marshal rode up, drew his gun, and pointed it at Vane's chest. Silas Vane, you're under arrest for fraud, arson, attempted murder, and about 6 other crimes I'll think of on the ride back to Cheyenne. Vane's face twisted with rage. He reached for his gun. The marshal shot him in the shoulder before he could draw. Vane fell from his horse, screaming. It wasn't a fatal wound, but it was the end of his power all the same. The marshal's men rounded up Vane's remaining crew. Jake dismounted and ran to the house, bursting through the front door. His eyes went wide at the carnage. Broken glass, bullet holes, blood on the floor. You two all right? We're alive. Caleb lowered his rifle. I thought you didn't make it. Almost didn't. They ambushed me first night out, took the ledger. Jake's grin was fierce. But Otto's smart. He'd made a copy and hid it with Chen. I doubled back, got it, rode straight through, told the marshal everything. Vivian felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on the floor, still clutching the shotgun. She'd shot someone. The house was destroyed. The barn was ashes. Pete was wounded and might die. But they'd won. People poured into the ranch, Martha bringing bandages for Pete, Chen with food, Otto to assess the damage. The marshal took statements from everyone, his face growing grimmer with each story of Vane's manipulation. This is bigger than I thought, he told Caleb. I'll need to bring in the territorial governor. Vane's got connections that go all the way to Washington. Will it stick? Caleb asked. With this many witnesses and Otto's ledger, it'll stick. The marshal looked at Vivian. You the one who organized the townspeople? She nodded, not trusting her voice. That took guts. Most people would have run. I tried running once, Vivian said quietly. It didn't solve anything. The marshal tipped his hat to her, then went to supervise loading Vane and his men into a wagon for transport. As the sun set, Vivian stood by the ruins of the barn and watched the last embers die. Caleb came to stand beside her. We lost a lot today, he said. We saved more. The mortgage is still due. I know. Vivian was too tired to think about that now. But Vane's credit scheme is broken. That has to count for something. It does. Caleb turned to face her. I know this wasn't what you signed on for. I signed on to help save your ranch. We're not done yet. Vivian. He caught her hand. You could have died today. You should have run when I told you to. Why didn't you? She thought about Edgar, about the wedding she'd fled, about every moment in her life when she'd been told what to do, who to be, how to live. Because running didn't make me free, she said. Fighting did. Caleb nodded slowly. Then he did something that surprised her. He pulled her into a hug. Not romantic, not possessive. Just human contact between two people who'd survived something terrible together. Vivian let herself lean into it. Let herself feel the exhaustion and fear and relief all at once. For the first time since leaving Boston, she wasn't running and she wasn't alone. She was home. The next few weeks were chaos. The marshal's investigation uncovered fraud that stretched across 3 territories. Vane's assets were seized, his properties redistributed to the people he'd swindled. The bank forgave half of Caleb's mortgage when it came out that Vane had bribed them to accelerate it. The ranch slowly rebuilt. The barn went up first, with help from every able-bodied person in Red Hollow. Martha organized meals. Otto donated metalwork. Chen provided materials at cost. It wasn't charity, it was community, the kind Vivian had never known existed. She worked alongside everyone else, hammering nails, hauling lumber, learning skills she'd never needed in Boston. Her hands, already calloused from the general store, grew harder. Her body grew stronger. And with each board she placed, each nail she drove, she felt more solid, more real. Pete recovered from his gunshot wound, though his shoulder would never be quite right. He joked that it gave him an excuse to do less heavy lifting, but Vivian saw the way he winced when he thought no one was looking. By December, the ranch was functional again. Not thriving, but stable. The mortgage was paid, the cattle were fed, the books were balanced. It was enough. On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse, and Vivian sat with Caleb by the fire in the main house. They'd been working on plans for spring planting, but the numbers had blurred and the conversation had drifted. "I've been thinking," Caleb said. About making this permanent. The ranch needs someone running the business side full time. Someone who knows what they're doing." Vivian looked at him. "Are you offering me a partnership? I'm offering you whatever you want." He met her eyes. "You've earned it 10 times over. Half ownership of the ranch, full decision-making authority on finances, equal say in everything. We'd be partners, true partners." It was everything she'd wanted when she'd left Boston. Independence, ownership, a life built on her own terms. But something made her hesitate. "What about the other thing?" she asked quietly. "What other thing?" "The thing where we've been dancing around each other for months, where we've gone from strangers to colleagues to something else neither of us wants to name." Caleb's expression was carefully neutral. "I didn't want to assume." "I'm not asking you to assume, I'm asking you to be honest." He was quiet for a long moment. "I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone since Sarah. But I also know you came here to be free, not to trade one cage for another. So I'm offering you the partnership with no strings. Whatever happens between us personally, or doesn't happen, the business arrangement stands." Vivian stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow was falling, soft and steady, covering the scars the fire had left. She thought about Edgar, who'd offered her everything except choice, about her father, who'd seen her as property to be married off, about every man who'd tried to tell her who she should be. Caleb wasn't doing that. He was offering her autonomy and acknowledging his feelings without making demands. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever given her. She turned back to him. "I care about you too. I didn't want to. I came here planning to be alone forever. But you're different." "Different how?" "You see me. Not the version you want me to be, just me." She crossed back to him. "I don't know what that means for us. I'm still figuring out who I am out here, but I know I don't want to run anymore. And I know I want to build this ranch with you, as partners, and maybe eventually as something more." Caleb stood, took her hand. "I can work with eventually." "Good." Vivian smiled. "Because you're stuck with me now." They stood like that for a while, two people who'd fought their way to something like peace. Outside, Red Hollow settled into winter, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, carrying new people west toward new lives, toward the same uncertain freedom Vivian had found. She didn't envy them the journey, but she understood it. And if they made it to Red Hollow, she'd help them survive it, the way Martha and Chen and Caleb had helped her. Because that was what freedom actually meant. Not running, not hiding, standing with others and fighting for the life you chose to build. Spring came late to Wyoming that year. The snow held on through March, melted reluctantly in April, and finally surrendered in May to mud and new grass and the kind of warmth that made everything feel possible again. Vivian stood on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house, watching the sun climb over the eastern hills, and tried to remember the woman who'd arrived here 7 months ago, terrified, exhausted, with nothing but a satchel and desperate hope. That woman felt like a stranger now. Behind her, the door opened and Caleb stepped out, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He passed one to her without a word and leaned against the railing. "Pete says the heifers are looking good," he said. "We might actually turn a profit this year." "We will turn a profit." Vivian sipped her coffee. "I ran the numbers 3 times. As long as the market holds and we don't lose any more cattle to wolves, we'll clear the mortgage and have enough left over to start rebuilding the herd." "You sound confident." "I am confident. Numbers don't lie." Caleb smiled. "No, but they don't account for bad luck either." "Then we'll just have to make our own luck." It had become their morning ritual, coffee on the porch, reviewing the day's work, planning the future in careful increments. Some mornings they talked business. Some mornings they talked about nothing at all. And some mornings, like this one, the conversation drifted toward the thing neither of them had quite figured out how to name. "I got a letter from Chen yesterday," Vivian said. "Martha's engaged to the new school teacher." Good for her. She deserves some happiness. She's asking if I'll stand up with her at the wedding. Caleb glanced at her. You going to? I think so. It feels strange, though, being asked to participate in something I ran from. That was different. Was it? Vivian set down her cup. A wedding's still a wedding. A woman still gives up her name, her independence. The law still treats her like property. Not if the man sees her as an equal. Caleb's voice was quiet. Not if it's a choice she makes freely. They'd had versions of this conversation before, usually late at night when the work was done and the ranch was quiet. Caleb never pushed, never demanded, but Vivian could feel the question underneath every careful word. What did she want from this partnership? From him? The truth was, she didn't know yet. She cared about him. That much was certain. Cared in a way that made her chest ache when he was hurt, made her smile when he walked into a room, made her imagine futures she'd never let herself consider in Boston. But caring and committing were different things, and commitment still felt like a trap. I'm not ready, she said finally, to think about that. I know. I'm not asking you to be. But you want to ask eventually. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Eventually, yeah, but not today. Today I just want to drink coffee with my business partner and watch the sun come up. Vivian looked at him. This man who'd given her work when she had nothing, who'd fought beside her when the fight seemed hopeless, who offered her space to heal without demanding anything in return. He was patient in ways Edgar had never been. Honest in ways her father couldn't imagine. And every day she spent beside him made it harder to remember why she'd ever thought being alone was the same thing as being free. Thank you, she said. For what? For not being in a hurry. He smiled and touched her hand briefly, a gesture that had become their compromise, affection without pressure, connection without chains. Then he drained his coffee and headed toward the barn, leaving Vivian alone with her thoughts and the wide Wyoming sky. The weeks that followed were busy. Calving season hit hard, and every hand was needed from dawn to well past dark. Vivian learned to assist with difficult births, to bottle feed orphaned calves, to recognize the signs of illness before it spread through the herd. Her clothes were perpetually covered in blood and mud and worse things, and she'd never felt more competent in her life. Red Hollow changed too. With Vane gone and his properties redistributed, the town began to breathe. New businesses opened, families moved in. The territorial governor visited and promised investment in schools and roads. It wasn't prosperity, not yet, but it was hope, which was close enough. Chen retired and sold the general store to his daughter and son-in-law, who moved back from their ranch down south. At the sale party, he pulled Vivian aside. You did good, he said. Better than I expected. You expected me to fail. I expected you to run again when things got hard. Instead, you fought. Chen's eyes were warm. That takes more courage than most people have. I didn't feel courageous. Most of the time I was terrified. That's what courage is. Being terrified and doing it anyway. He pressed an envelope into her hands. This is for you. Don't open it until you need it. Inside was $500 in a note. For your next beginning. Use it wisely. Vivian's eyes burned. She hugged Chen hard, this old man who'd given her a chance when he had no reason to, and felt another piece of her past settle into place. In June, a letter arrived from Boston. Vivian recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it in the fire without reading it. But something made her open it instead. The letter was brief. Her father had died of a heart attack in March. The funeral had been private. Thomas was managing the estate and doing well. Her mother hoped Vivian was safe, wherever she was, and would consider coming home now that the circumstances had changed. Vivian read it twice, waiting to feel something. Grief, relief, vindication. Instead, she felt only a distant sadness for the man her father might have been if he'd loved his daughter more than his reputation. She showed the letter to Caleb that evening. You going back? He asked. No, there's nothing there for me anymore. Your family. My family made it clear what I was worth to them, a commodity to be traded for social advantage. Vivian folded the letter. Thomas is better off without me complicating things, and my mother made her choice when she sided with my father over me. That's harsh, maybe, but it's true. She looked at Caleb. The people here, you, Chen, Martha, even Pete with his terrible jokes, You've been more family to me in 7 months than anyone in Boston was in 23 years. Why would I go back? Caleb nodded slowly. What about Edgar? The letter doesn't mention him. Vivian had wondered about that too. Either he married someone else or he's still angry I embarrassed him. Either way, he's not my problem anymore. She burned the letter that night and felt lighter than she had in months. July brought the first real test of the ranch's recovery. A buyer came through looking to purchase cattle in bulk for the railroad camps pushing west. It was the kind of deal that could set the ranch up for years, or bankrupt them if they overcommitted and couldn't deliver. Vivian and Caleb spent 3 days negotiating. The buyer was sharp, seasoned, not easily impressed. But Vivian had learned enough about cattle and enough about reading people that she held her ground. When the buyer tried to lowball them, she walked away. When he sweetened the offer, she countered. By the end, they had a contract that was fair on both sides and a delivery schedule they could actually meet. You're good at this, the buyer said as they shook hands. You ever think about doing it professionally? I am doing it professionally, Vivian replied. The buyer laughed. Fair enough. Most women I know wouldn't have the stomach for it. Then you don't know the right women. After he left, Caleb looked at her with something like awe. You just negotiated a $5,000 contract. We negotiated it. You did most of the talking, because you were smart enough to let me. Vivian grinned. We make a good team. Yeah. Caleb's expression was soft. We do. That night they celebrated with the hands. Whiskey Pete had been saving, a meal Lin Chen sent over, stories that got more exaggerated with each retelling. Jake insisted Vivian had stared down the buyer with the same look she'd used before shooting Vane's man, which wasn't true but made everyone laugh. Pete claimed Caleb had nearly fainted from relief when the contract was signed, which was closer to accurate. As the evening wore on and the stories grew quieter, Vivian found herself sitting beside Caleb on the porch steps, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. After what? After the ranch is stable. After the debts are paid. After we're not just surviving anymore. Vivian considered. I used to think freedom meant being alone. Not answering to anyone, not needing anyone. But that's not freedom. That's just isolation. So what is freedom? Choosing who you stand with, choosing what you build, choosing what matters enough to fight for. She looked at him. I choose this. The ranch. The town. You. Caleb's breath caught. Vivian, I'm not saying I'm ready for everything. Marriage still scares me. The idea of giving up control still makes me want to run. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. She took his hand. So I'm choosing to try. To see what this could be if we both want it. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking permission with every second. Vivian kissed him back and felt something shift inside her. Not surrender, but opening. The difference between a door closing and a door opening wide. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I've loved you since you called me stubborn while I had a head injury. But I'll wait as long as you need. I know. Vivian's voice was rough. That's why I'm not running. They didn't tell anyone right away. It felt too new, too fragile to share. But people noticed anyway. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen. The way Caleb's hand found hers when he thought no one was looking. The way Vivian smiled more, laughed easier, stopped flinching when someone stood too close. In August, Martha got married in Red Hollow's small church. Vivian stood beside her as promised, wearing a dress Lin Chen had helped her sew. It was simple, practical. Nothing like the elaborate gown she'd fled in Boston. But when Martha turned to her during the ceremony and smiled, Vivian felt something unexpected. Joy for her friend, and a glimmer of understanding that maybe, someday, this could be different than what she'd run from. After the wedding, at the reception in the saloon that was no longer Vane's, Martha pulled Vivian aside. Thank you for standing with me, she said. Of course, you're my friend. I'm serious. A year ago, I was drowning in debt and fear. You showed me I didn't have to accept that. You showed me I could fight. Martha squeezed her hands. Whatever happens with you and Caleb, don't let old ghosts make your choices. You deserve to be happy. Vivian hugged her, thinking about Edgar, about her father, about all the men who'd tried to tell her what happiness should look like. Then she thought about Caleb, who'd never tried to define it for her. "I'm working on it," she said. September brought the first frost and the end of summer's easy optimism. The cattle sale went through without issues, and the ranch's accounts showed their first real profit. Vivian paid off the remaining mortgage personally, using money she'd saved from her salary and the emergency fund Chen had given her. When she handed Caleb the receipt, his eyes went wet. "We did it," he said. "Yeah, we did." Yeah. That night, Vivian lay in bed thinking about the future. The ranch was secure. The town was thriving. Her past in Boston felt distant, irrelevant. She'd built something here, not just a business, but a life, a real life, earned through work and risk and the willingness to stand her ground. The question was what came next. The answer arrived in October, exactly 1 year after Vivian had fled her wedding. A young woman stepped off the stagecoach in Red Hollow, looking lost and terrified and achingly familiar. She couldn't have been more than 20, with torn gloves and a satchel that had seen better days and eyes that kept darting around like she expected someone to drag her back onto the coach. Vivian watched from the porch of Chen's store. She still visited weekly to help with accounts, and saw herself a year ago. Same fear, same desperate hope, same bone-deep exhaustion. She walked over before she could talk herself out of it. "You look lost," Vivian said gently. The young woman jumped. "I'm fine, I'm looking for work, any kind of work." "Where are you from?" "East." The answer was automatic, defensive. "Running from something?" The young woman's face closed down. "That's none of your business." "No, it's not." Vivian smiled. "But I ran too, about a year ago, from Boston. From a wedding I didn't want and a life that would have killed me slowly." The young woman stared at her. "And they talk about the one who fought Vane. I didn't fight him alone, but yeah, that's me." Vivian gestured toward the general store. "Come on, let's get you some food and figure out what you need." Over soup and bread, the young woman told her story. Her name was Claire. She was from Philadelphia. Her father had arranged her marriage to a man 30 years older, a business associate with a reputation for cruelty. She'd stolen money from her mother's jewelry box and run. It was a different city, a different man, the same cage. "I don't know what to do," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I've got maybe $10 left. No skills, nowhere to go." Vivian thought about Mr. Chen giving her a chance, about Caleb offering her partnership, about Martha and Otto and everyone who'd stood together when it mattered. "You've got somewhere to go," she said. "The ranch needs help with cooking and general work. Pay isn't great, but room and board are included, and nobody will ask questions about your past." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Because someone helped me when I needed it, and because women like us, we have to look out for each other. The world won't do it for us." Claire came to the ranch the next day. Vivian set her up in the spare room, taught her the routines, introduced her to the hands. Pete was skeptical. "Another runaway?" But Jake was kind, and Caleb simply nodded and said, "Welcome. Work hard and you'll do fine here. Over the following weeks, Vivian watched Claire transform the same way she had. The fear faded. The competence grew. The hunted look left her eyes. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to manage inventory, to handle herself around men who respected her work instead of seeing her as property. One evening, Vivian found Claire on the porch, staring at the sunset. "You miss Philadelphia?" Vivian asked. "I miss my mother, my brother, but not the life." Claire looked at her. "How did you know it would be worth it? Leaving everything behind?" "I didn't. I just knew staying would destroy me." Vivian sat beside her. "The thing nobody tells you about running is that you're still running until you find something worth standing for. I found it here. You will too. What if I don't? Then you keep looking, but at least you'll be free while you do it." In November, Caleb asked Vivian to marry him. Not dramatically, not with a grand gesture. They were working on the books together, reviewing the year's numbers, and he simply set down his pencil and said, "I want to spend my life with you, legally, officially, as my wife and my partner. What do you think?" Vivian's first instinct was panic. Her second was to run. Her third was to look at this man who'd given her everything Edgar had promised but actually meant it, and realize she'd been ready for months without knowing it. "I think yes," she said, but on conditions. Name them. The ranch stays in both our names. Equal ownership, no legal tricks that give you control. Done. I keep my salary separate. What I earn is mine. Done. And if you ever try to tell me what to do the way my father did, the way Edgar would have, I leave. No discussion, no second chances. We're partners or we're nothing. Caleb took her hands. Vivian, I've seen what you're capable of when someone tries to control you. I'm not that stupid or that suicidal. You're right. We're partners in everything. Or we're nothing. Then yes, I'll marry you. They married in January, exactly 1 year after Vivian had arrived in Red Hollow. It was a small ceremony, just the ranch hands, Chen and Len, Martha and her new husband, Otto, a few other townspeople who'd become friends. No elaborate gown, no 300 guests, no performance for society's benefit. Vivian wore a simple dress she'd made herself. Caleb wore his best shirt. They spoke their vows in the ranch house living room with Pete serving as witness and Jake making terrible jokes to cut the tension. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride," Caleb looked at Vivian first, asking permission. She nodded, and he kissed her, and it felt nothing like the kisses Edgar had stolen. This was chosen. This was wanted. This was free. After the ceremony, after the meal, after the celebration died down, Vivian stood on the porch watching the winter stars. Caleb came to stand beside her. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About marrying you?" "No." Vivian leaned against him. "About leaving Boston? Not for a second. What about everything in between? The fear, the fighting, the times you thought you wouldn't make it. Those are the parts that made me who I am now." She looked at him. The woman who ran from that wedding altar couldn't have done this. Couldn't have built a business or fought vain or stood in front of a scared girl and told her she'd survive. That woman was too afraid of her own strength. And now? Now I know what I'm capable of. Vivian smiled. Turns out, it's a lot. Years passed. The ranch grew. Vivian and Caleb added land, hired more hands, built a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle. They had setbacks, droughts, hard winters, market crashes, but they weathered them together, making decisions as partners, trusting each other's judgment. Claire stayed on and eventually married Jake, much to Pete's amusement. They built a small house on the edge of the property and started their own family. Other women came through Red Hollow running from bad situations, and Vivian helped each one the way she'd been helped, with work, with space, with the knowledge that survival was possible. In the 5th year of their marriage, Vivian gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah, after Caleb's first wife, because grief and love could coexist, and honoring the past didn't mean being trapped by it. Holding her daughter for the first time, Vivian thought about the woman she might have become if she'd married Edgar. Powerless, controlled, slowly diminished until nothing remained but a shell. Her daughter would have inherited that powerlessness, that expectation of surrender. Instead, this child would grow up watching her mother run a ranch, would see her parents make decisions together, argue as equals, respect each other's autonomy, would learn that freedom wasn't running from fear, it was choosing what you'd fight for. "You thinking about Boston?" Caleb asked, watching her face. "I'm thinking about choices," Vivian said, "and how one terrified decision to run changed everything. You could have ended up anywhere. Could have died on the train, frozen in that storm, been killed by Vane. I know, but I didn't." She looked down at her daughter's tiny face. "I survived. And then I did more than survive. I built a life worth living. It wasn't a perfect life. The ranch still struggled some years. The work was hard. Vivian's body bore the marks of it. Calloused hands, a scar on her shoulder from helping birth a breech calf, lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun. She was nothing like the polished Boston debutante she'd been trained to be. She was better. 10 years after running from her wedding, Vivian stood on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now, solid, home, and watched her daughter play in the yard while Caleb worked with the hands in the corral. The morning was clear, the kind of Wyoming sky that made everything feel possible. A stagecoach rolled into the yard, unusual, but not unheard of. Vivian walked down to meet it. A young woman stepped out, maybe 17, with a black eye and a satchel, and that look Vivian knew too well. "I'm looking for Vivian Thorne," the girl said. "That's me." They said in town you help women who are running. The girl's voice shook. I need help, please. Vivian saw herself in this girl's face, saw Claire, saw Martha, saw every woman who'd ever had to choose between a cage and the unknown. Come inside, she said. Let's talk. As they walked toward the house, Caleb caught Vivian's eye. She nodded. Another lost soul. Another chance to pay forward what had been given to her. He smiled and went back to work, trusting her judgment the way he always had. Inside, Vivian sat the girl down, poured coffee, and asked her story. It was different in details, but the same in essence. A father who valued property over people. A marriage arranged for business. A girl who knew she deserved better, but didn't know how to claim it. What's your name, Vivi? Vivian asked. Anna. Well, Anna, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Running is just the start. The real work comes after. Building something new. Learning who you are when nobody's telling you. Standing your ground when people try to take what you've earned. Vivian leaned forward. It's hard. Harder than anything you've probably done. But it's worth it, because the life you build for yourself is worth more than any life someone else builds for you. Anna's eyes filled with tears. You really think I can do it? I know you can, because I did it, and I was more scared than you are now. Vivian smiled. You've already made the hardest choice, leaving. Everything else is just work. She gave Anna a room, a job helping with the household accounts, and space to heal. Some mornings, Vivian would see her on the porch watching the sunrise the way Vivian had done that first year, and she'd remember what it felt like to wake up free. Years continued to pass. Sarah grew into a capable, fierce girl who could rope a calf and balance books with equal skill. More women came through, some staying, some leaving once they were strong enough to continue their journeys. The ranch became known as a place where runaways could catch their breath, and Vivian never turned anyone away. She exchanged occasional letters with Thomas, who'd married well and managed the Boston estate with competence their father never had. He never asked her to come home. She never offered. They'd made their peace with being siblings separated by distance and choices. Chen died peacefully in his sleep at 87, and Vivian wept at his funeral like he'd been her own father. In a way, he had been, the first person to see her potential and give her a chance to use it. On her 40th birthday, Vivian sat with Caleb on the porch, watching their grandchildren, Claire's children, play in the yard. They'd built more than a ranch. They'd built a legacy. You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd married Edgar? Caleb asked. Vivian didn't have to think about it. I'd be dead. Maybe not physically, but dead in every way that mattered. Think you ever found someone else? Probably. Someone more willing to be molded. She took Caleb's hand. I used to be angry at my father for arranging that marriage. Angry at Edgar for being who he was. Angry at my mother for not protecting me. But I'm not angry anymore. What are you? Grateful. Because if they hadn't pushed me to the edge, I never would have jumped. Never would have found out what I was capable of. Vivian looked at him. Never would have found this. Caleb kissed her temple. Best thing I ever did was offer you a job. Best thing I ever did was say yes. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the ranch they'd built together. Somewhere in the house, Anna, who'd stayed and now managed the accounts for 3 neighboring ranches, was teaching Sarah's daughter how to balance a ledger. The cycle continued, women teaching women, strength passing from one generation to the next. That night, Vivian lay in bed thinking about the scared girl who'd torn off a wedding dress and run into the unknown. She wished she could tell that girl it would be all right, that the fear would pass, that the life waiting on the other side of courage was more than worth the risk. But that girl had to learn it herself. They all did. Because the lesson only stuck when you earned it through survival, through fighting, through choosing yourself over and over again until choosing yourself became natural. Vivian had chosen herself, had chosen freedom over safety, risk over certainty, partnership over control. And in doing so, she'd transformed from a runaway bride into a woman who owned her own destiny. Some people would say she was lucky, that she'd escaped one cage and stumbled into a better situation through chance. They'd be wrong. Luck was boarding the right train or meeting the right people. Everything after that was work. Hard, grinding, terrifying work that required her to become someone new, someone stronger, braver, more honest than the woman Boston had tried to create. She'd earned this life. Every acre of land, every head of cattle, every scar and callus and gray hair. She'd earned Caleb's respect by proving herself his equal. She'd earned the town's trust by standing with them against Vane. She'd earned her daughter's admiration by showing her that women could build empires from nothing. And most importantly, she'd earned her own respect. That was the thing Edgar and her father had tried to steal, her ability to look herself in the mirror and be proud of who she saw. They'd wanted her to define herself through their eyes, measure her worth by their standards, accept their version of who she should be. She'd rejected all of it, had built her own standards, her own definition, her own version of success, and it looked nothing like what Boston had promised her. It looked like this ranch at sunrise, like Caleb's hand in hers, like Anna's growing confidence, like Sarah's fierce independence, like a life built on choices instead of obligations. As Vivian drifted toward sleep, she thought about all the women still out there, trapped in engagements they didn't want, marriages that would destroy them, lives that belonged to everyone but themselves. She hoped they'd find the courage to run, hoped they'd find people willing to help them build something new, hoped they'd learn what she'd learned. That freedom wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. That strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up. That partnership didn't mean surrender. It meant finding someone who saw you as an equal and treated you that way. And that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was tear off a wedding dress and run toward a future you couldn't see, trusting that anything, even the unknown, even the danger, even the possibility of failure, was better than a cage. Vivian Hale had run from her wedding altar in Boston. Vivian Thorne had built an empire in Wyoming. They were the same woman, separated by courage and time, and 10,000 small choices to keep fighting. She'd chosen well, and she'd never looked back.